Hey guys, so probably going to put this video on our healthcare in Japan playlist because I think this is probably a mental health question. So in a recent video I mentioned briefly when I was talking about mental health about absenteeism from school and about how 350,000 kids are absent from school. Mentioned that briefly. The statistic is that in 2024 over 350,000 kids, elementary and junior high school kids, were absent from school for more than 30 school days in the year. So that's obviously quite a bit, for a kid to miss that much school. So it's been a growing problem. There's a few reasons for it, of course. So the first one would be probably pretty much anywhere in the world there are a percentage of kids who don't want to go to school, right? I think most of us can relate to that. Adding to it or making the problem worse probably are a few issues. One would be there is still a lot of bullying that goes on in schools. The kohai senpai thing where everybody has higher and lower friends and the relationship between them where the senpais can tell the kids below them what to do. That's all good if you're senpai, if the people above you are nice people, but if people above you are not nice people, obviously it can result in bullying. And bullying is still a thing. They do talk about it a bit here now, but they're not actively doing much about it. It's sort of accepted in Japanese society that's one of the things that keeps Japanese people in line and keeps Japanese people conforming is the bullying. That if you do anything differently or you stand out from the crowd or anything else, that you'll get bullied. And it sort of forces everybody to behave themselves. And it is an accepted thing in schools and in society in general. They won't tell you that. The official story is that we're trying to stop bullying in Japan, but the reality is that they usually just let it happen and it's just considered to be a normal thing. So obviously that's a problem. And then I mentioned then that they sort of accept the bullying as a way to keep people in line. The other thing that makes school harder for a lot of kids is the fact that Japanese school is so regimented. We've sort of showed you a few examples of this and we've talked about it before, but it really is sort of military. Elementary school at the start's pretty relaxed, but there's always this element of, they march around the place at school and they stand up all together and sit down all together and stand up all together, and there's a lot of really military style behavior that goes on one level. And then the conformity thing, in Japanese society in general, as we've talked about lots of times before, Japanese society in general, conformity is really pushed, and this starts to get programmed into the people from when they're little kids. So you can see it, you can see the difference. I've seen with my own kids that, kindergarten is pretty relaxed, and you can sort of see there's some conformity expected of them, but it's sort of pretty relaxed. And then elementary school, you can see it growing, the intensity growing. At first it's reasonably relaxed with some sort of regimented discipline in it, and then you can see that regimented type behaviour gets stronger and stronger as they go through elementary school and they go to junior high school. And junior high school is when they start wearing a full uniform, and they have dress codes for the uniform, but also with things like their hair. They've got options for their hair. They can have, like for the girls, they can have their hair short, or if they have it longer, they have to have it in a single ponytail, or, it's very regimented. The goal is to try and make everybody the same. So make everybody look the same, and everybody act the same, and everybody think the same, and then, as we've talked about before, in Japanese society, if you do anything different, it's look at that. So you can imagine the pressure. I mean, we've talked about the pressure on adults in Japan to conform with everybody else. Imagine the pressure on a kid where, kids in any country always feel a bit of peer pressure, don't they, to try and conform and be accepted by their peers. So you imagine in a society that's more like that, where everybody's expected to be the same and think the same and look the same and be the same, anything that's different about any kid is going to get attention drawn to it. From just comments and funny looks to full-on bullying, and so that sort of pressure that they feel. And then even if they're not being pressured and bullied directly, just that feeling that they need to conform and they need to be the same as everybody else obviously takes the pressure to a new level, you know. So it's not surprising when you see how Japanese society works and when you see what it's like for the kids, you know, going to school and things like that, when you do hear about these stories about you know, so many kids not wanting to go to school, totally understandable. So that's, from the kids' point of view, that's what's going on there with that 350,000 kids. I suspect that's the 350,000 that they reported on that were 30 days or more. There's probably loads that are 20 days or more. You know, it's a pretty common thing now. We're hearing about it more and more. So that's from the kids' point of view. From the adults' point of view, what's happening is, and we touched on this on a previous video too, is that they used to do gambare, 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 which means, you know, try hard or do your best. Gambare, gambare, gambare. So that was deep in Japanese society. You know, that do your best, still is, it still is. But that was always the focus, gambare, 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 gambare. And what would happen is people would get to the end of their rope, you know, where they couldn't deal with it anymore, and they keep getting told, and this happens with adults too, and we've talked about that before too, you know, we know a couple of people that killed themselves here, and that was one of the things, as they were getting to the edge of their limit, they kept getting told, do your best, do your best, do your best, you know, gambare. And gambare, it sort of means do your best or try your hardest, but it's deeper than that. I mean, it's in Japanese psyche from when they first learn to talk and they first start listening. Gambare, gambare, gambare. It's got a really strong meaning in Japanese culture, you know. And oh, sorry guys. So that what they do is they push people to their limit, and we got 30,000 suicides a year, right, from all this pressure and from all this gambare thing. So what's happened is they've sort of over the last, it's recent, over the last 10, 20 years maybe, they've realised this, that if they keep pushing, and a lot of those 30,000 suicides were junior high school and high school students and the occasional elementary school student as well, which is just terrible, isn't it? The kids being pushed past their limit. And then they've sort of started to realise, oh, okay, that's a problem. So now what we get is the parents, and we know a junior high school student who struggles with this, just cannot go to school, just cannot deal with going to school. If she goes to school, she comes home really soon, and she just can't deal with being there. And the story across the line, her parents say to her, the parents tell her, oh, it's okay, don't worry about it. The advice from the teacher and the school counsellor and an outside counsellor were all, just don't push. Just don't push. And that was it. So it seems now that they're starting to realise that the gambare thing was pushing people past their limit. So now what they do is they say, don't push. So that the teachers say don't push, the school counsellor says don't push, you know, and so the outside counsellor says don't push. So now the message is to the parents and the teachers and everybody is don't push, but there's nothing else. There's very little that I've never seen any real good counselling or therapy or psychology going on here ever in any of these circumstances that I've seen over the years with kids or with adults. That there just doesn't seem to be any. There just doesn't seem to be any. We actually took a guy to a mental hospital in Nagoya years ago. I think I might have made a video about it. And maybe, I don't know, 10, 12 years ago, took him to a mental hospital in Nagoya, and we went in there, and I went in with him, and he sat down in this room, and this doctor sort of just listened to him for a couple of minutes, what he was talking about, prescribed him some tablets, because he hadn't slept and he was sort of stressing out, prescribed him some what do you call that? Prescribed him some tablets to help him sleep, and sent him on his way. And there was no counselling, there was no therapy, there was nothing. And that was it, and there was no follow-up, there was nothing. And, you know, I actually had a family friend who's a psychology student, and I was talking to her about it once. And it just, they've got, you know, as I mentioned in that video recently, you know, when it comes to psychology and counselling and therapy and that sort of thing, they're like 60, 70 years ago. You know, 60, 70 years ago in a lot of other countries, you know, people didn't talk about their problems and didn't talk about their stuff, and there was no real good therapy or counselling going on, you know. It was all sort of a new field. And Japan's just like that still now. And people don't see the way their society works, talking about your problems with people, you know, in a lot of our other societies, you know, if you're living in Europe or America or Australia or somewhere, you know, probably you can talk with your friends about your things, you know, that you got something that's bothering you about work, it's stressing me out, it's too much, you know, and you can talk to your friends about it and have a good chat about it and have a drink and talk, and then at the end of a couple of hours of chatting, you feel a lot better. Or you can go to a professional, you can go to a counsellor or a therapist or a psychologist or a psychiatrist, and they'll help you through it, you know, and help you deal with your issues and work it out, and that's sort of normal in our societies, whereas here it's not. Here it's not. They just don't do it. So that girl that we know, the junior high school girl, they've said don't push. And so the parents are going, oh, okay. So when she gets up in the morning, if she doesn't want to go to school, they go, all right. And so she just stays home. And so those 350,000 kids, I imagine that's what's going to be happening there. They get up in the morning, so they don't want to go to school, and the parents go, oh, okay. Now you imagine giving a kid a choice whether they go to school or not. You know, if you don't want to go, you don't have to go. How often are they going to go? Right? It's pretty normal, isn't it? You tell a kid they've got a choice if they go to school or not, they're not going to go. And then there's no sort of follow-up as to helping them go, talking to them about why they don't want to go and helping work out what the issues are. I've got first-aid experience of some of those kids. There's a friend of ours who owns a juku, and juku is that thing they go to after school, and on weekends they go there to do their homework and to learn all the stuff they should be taught at school. And juku is normal for most kids now, probably most junior high school and high school kids now, not all, but a lot of them, high percentage of them go to juku, because they do their homework there, they get extra lessons there, and that helps them compete to get better scores at school and go to better universities and that sort of thing. So juku is a real standard thing to do here. However, that juku, during the day when the other kids are at school, they actually have a sort of a private school there where kids can go there, and at the end of the year, or at the end of the 3 years, they can get their high school diploma, right? So that they can go on, probably not university, but they'll have a high school diploma at the end of it. And I actually spent a couple of hours there a while ago, and it was a pretty relaxed afternoon, the kids were all sort of playing and things, but I got to talk to all of them at different times. And there was a whole scale of issues going on there. There was one kid who was just sitting with his head down like this, and he couldn't look at people, and if I spoke to him, he either didn't answer. The other guy actually said to me, he won't answer you, he won't talk to you, he said. But I could get him to talk to me. I just sat down beside him and I was looking out the window and I was sort of putting zero pressure on him. So I got down, sitting beside him so our heads were the same level, and I sat and looked out the window like this. And I sort of saw him sort of half looking at me, right? He was curious. He was about 16 years old. And it took a while, but I was sort of saying some stuff and he was sort of answering, and I was saying some stuff, and he wouldn't look at me directly, and he had his head down, he was sort of whispering. But I was communicating with him, you know. So he out of all the kids, he had the most issues. And then the others, there were some brilliant kids in that room. And the story was that these 15 kids couldn't go to a normal school. And a lot of them were really good. I spoke English to a few of them, and their English was really good. And just generally talking with them, intelligent, switched on kids. But different kids from normal Japanese kids for different reasons. There was a girl there, had short hair, fairly deep voice, dressed like a dude, and obviously identified herself as a dude. Wonderful. We got on really well. There was a couple of dudes there that were doing tech stuff on an iPad, and really switched on, nerdy dudes, you know, and they were fine. There was no one in that room, probably including the quiet kid, who had the most issues. Probably not one person in that room that couldn't have gone to a normal school in another country. You know, that I could see that they're all different from normal Japanese kids, but nothing wrong with them. You know, no big issues that couldn't be solved or that wouldn't be dealt with in another country. You know, that all of them. That quiet kid, he was listening to everything that was going on. And when there was stuff happening and I asked him about the stuff that was happening and he answered me and he was switched on, he was fine. You know, nothing that a good counsellor or a good therapist or somebody couldn't have helped him with, you know. And all the other kids were the same. Whatever issues, there was a wild girl there that was 16 years old, that lots of piercings and a wild chick, you know, little clothes, inappropriate clothes to be wearing in a school environment, you know, really small skirt and really small top and stuff. But again, intelligent kid. When I talked to her, she was intelligent, you know. And I could just see though, yeah, I can't imagine any of these kids in a normal school environment here because it's so conformist, right? They're all junior high school and high school kids. And, you know, they're junior high school and high school, they all wear the uniform, they've got to have their hair the same, everything's got to be the same. And their behaviour and everything they do has to conform with everybody else in the room. And obviously these guys weren't real good at that. But in a normal country, in another country, these guys would have been probably at a normal school just being one of the kids in the class. Because, you know, in our own countries, in our other countries, you know, if we looked around the room in the high school, we had the whole variety of people, didn't we? You know, that were in the classroom, but not here. You know, I mean, inside, I mean, we know there's a variety of people too here of course, but it's your behaviour is expected to be the same. You're supposed to look the same. Your thinking is supposed to be the same. So obviously you can see the problem, right? You know, you can see why a lot of these kids don't want to go to school, and then the way that's being dealt with is just, oh, we won't push them then. You know, I mentioned recently the gibu apu thing, gibu apu. So they used to say gambare, 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 and now they say gibu apu, give up, give up. Now that just seems to be this way of doing it. And so we've gone from gambare to gibu apu, and there seems to be zero effective counselling or psychology or anything in the middle. And that's across the board in Japanese society. I think I talked about this in a video 15 years ago. It might have been triggered by that guy we took to that mental hospital. But they're just so far behind. You don't talk to people about your problems here. Don't talk, nobody. You know, the people that you spend the most time with here or anybody else, you know, the people just don't talk about their problems. They don't, I'm having a real problem with my boy going to school, or I'm having a real problem with my husband, or they just don't do it usually. You know, there are exceptions to it, but usually they don't. Because that's seen in Japanese society as laying your problems on your friends, and they feel bad if they do that. If anybody ever does tell you about a problem that they're having, they'll apologise, oh, sorry, I shouldn't talk about that, because they feel bad about it. So you can see the problem deep in Japanese society, deep in Japanese thinking, is talking to other people about your problems is considered to be unfair on them, because you're laying all this stuff on them and that you shouldn't do it. So everyone pretends that everything's good all the time, right? So you can see the problem. Everyone pretends everything's good. Nobody talks about any problems that they're having. I mean, chances are, if people here talk to each other about their problems, they'd realise that everybody else had the same problems, right? You know, women have problems with their husbands, and if they talk to each other about it, they'd realise that. And I mean, they do a little bit. I know my wife talks to her friends a little bit about stuff, but they try to avoid it. Anything negative, because it makes them feel bad, makes the other person feel bad. That's their thinking. So, you know, no idea of modern, so you can see it's like 60, 70 years ago in a lot of other countries it was the same, right? Nobody really talked about their personal feelings about things, and counselling and therapy and all those sorts of things just aren't a thing. And as I mentioned in that video recently, they lump it all together. Those 15 kids in that class was a whole scale, from the quiet guy who just couldn't look at you and just whispered, to the ones there, those nerdy guys were just normal kids, really. You know, all of them were. But you could see there was a scale of issues that they had. The quiet guy would have taken a bit of counselling to help him through his stuff, you know. But there was a couple others there wouldn't have taken much at all, that were you know, the whole scale. But in Japanese thinking, mentaru, they say, mental, mentaru, problem, right? Mentaru mondai aru, mentaru byoki. They say mental problem, and they say sick. And everybody in that room would have been classed as mental problem or sick. irrelevant of how mild or how severe it was. And this is the thing, this is what they do. And so same as those 350,000 kids not going to school, probably most of them, with a little bit of counselling and a little bit of help, would be okay to go to school. There'd be some that would have big issues probably that would take a lot more work, but you know, probably the majority of that 350,000 with a bit of modern counselling, a little bit of modern thinking, would be fine. But they're not going to get it probably. And see, it's generational too, because their parents never got it. You know, their parents would have been just told, gambare, gambare, gambare. They would never have had any effective therapy or counselling either. So they got no idea. And that thing that a lot of us would have considered normal when we were growing up, people sitting around at a barbecue talking about their problems at school or problems at work, or talking to your friends about your problems. You know, a friend come to your house, you go, oh man, work's driving me nuts, my boss is an idiot, you know, blah, blah, blah. And then 2 hours later, oh, I feel better now, thanks for that. And for us, that was all normal. But for them, it's not. For them, it's not. So these kids' parents have no idea either. And because their parents, and you know, it's never been a thing in Japanese society that we talk about our problems, or we work things through, or we talk things through, or none of that. All they knew was gambare, 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 and now they're told, oh, you can't say that anymore. So those friends of ours with the junior high school student, you know, when they were growing up, it was gambare, 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 and now they're told, oh, you can't say that anymore. So you just have to not push. So now they go, oh, okay, don't push. So they got nothing. They got no tools. They got no way to solve the problem except just the kid says they don't want to go to school. They go, oh, okay, we can't push. Okay, because everybody's scared to death that the teachers and the counsellors and the therapists and everybody else, they're scared to death that if they push the kid's going to kill themselves. And the parents too, obviously, are scared of that too, right? Because they know 30,000 deaths a year, and a lot of those, you know, a number of them are high school students and so on. So they're scared to death that if they push the kid's going to kill themselves, and that's all they got. So the two options are either push them and just gambare, gambare, or don't do anything and just go, oh, your choice. If you go to school or don't go to school, that's up to you. Well, most kids, including me when I was a kid, if you said to me, do you want to go to school or stay home? And what do they do if they stay home, do you reckon? Mum and Dad go to work, they stay home and play video games all day. You give a kid a choice, do you want to stay home and play video games all day, or do you want to go to school? Well, probably out of a class of 35, there might be 1 or 2 kids that might go to school. Oh, that's the other thing, class of 35. You know, in some schools, in some countries, you know, you won't get classes bigger than 20 or 25 or something. Here, quite normal in elementary school and high school to have classes of 35 kids, 36 kids, and of course one teacher with 35 or 36 kids doesn't have a lot of time for dealing with everybody's issues, right? So that's you know, they want the 35 kids to all conform, because the teacher's got 35 kids to deal with. Everybody has to conform and behave the same way and do the same stuff, and if they can't, well, the teacher doesn't want them there either. So you can see the problem, can't you? It's huge. It's absolutely huge, and it's like a lot of the societal problems in Japan, it's not going to be solved soon. You know, it's going to take a long time for them to sort this stuff out. You know, and because it's a whole way of thinking. That you know, they don't know what to do at the moment, because they all the older people who have grown up with the gambare, 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 and now they're getting told you can't do that anymore. They're going, they don't know what else to do. Oh, okay, gibu apu, let them stay home. So again, you know, I was asked to expand on that. Well, I mentioned this video in this topic in a video recently, and a couple of people asked me to expand on it. So I have, and again, it's not a complaint video, right? We've never made a video complaining about Japan, ever. Not one of them's complaining. Not one of them's saying that Japan should change. There's always someone that jumps up, you shouldn't complain if you don't like it, you should leave. Japan's Japanese, all that stuff. Yeah, we know all that. Not one of these videos has been complaining. Not one of them has been saying Japan should change. All of it's just observations. So this video is observing that at the moment they have this growing problem that's getting bigger every year. There's more and more kids that don't go to school, and they're all going, what should we do? So this is just observing that's what's happening, and observing that probably the way Japanese society works, this isn't going to be a thing that's fixed quickly. It's probably going to continue to get worse, and then eventually they'll have to start using some modern therapy and counselling techniques. It's not, for most of those kids, those 14 kids, that's all I can think about at the moment. There's 14, 15 kids that were in that room. And they were sort of playing board games, and there was two guys there on an iPad, and I just sort of wandered around and sat there and sort of chatted with them. And, you know, it really struck me as I left that place. I was driving away and I was thinking, pretty well, all of those kids, any of those kids would have been fine in one of my high school classes in Australia. Because we had all sorts of people in our classes in Australia, you know, and probably most of you guys watching in your countries too. You get a whole range of people, don't you? One of the guys in my high school ended up the ambassador to Europe, the American ambassador. He was American, and he ended up the American ambassador to Europe. We had doctors and lawyers and all sorts of people, and we all had all sorts of freaks, including me, right? So we had the whole range, and those 14, 15, can't remember, 14 or 15 kids, any one of those would have been fine in our room. Even that quiet guy with his head down, not talking to people and whispering, wouldn't have been surprised to have him in our class. Would have been fine, no problem, you know. So, but not here. Not here. It's all this conformity thing, and they don't know how to deal with anybody that's not conforming. Oh, what do we do? If we can't say gambare, 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 we've got no ideas. So, don't know. We'll just, you know, stand, like all these things that we report to you on, we just stand back and watch. And then if there's any developments or changes, we usually tell you about it, but that's all we can do. But it is a little bit frustrating. It is a little bit frustrating. Anything with kids, it's the same as those crazy driver videos. Anything that risks kids always is the most upsetting. You know, a lot of you guys would feel the same. That, you know, anything that adults do that messes themselves up, you know, okay. But anything that adults do that messes kids up is a hard thing to watch, isn't it? You know, it's like, what are you doing, you know? Then suddenly I disappeared. There was a camera problem at this point, guys, but I'd finished making the points quite a while ago, probably, so that's probably enough of that anyway. More videos coming soon.